Welcome back to another episode of Reflect Live, the podcast where stories come to life and hearts are opened. I am your host, Michelle. Here in Reflect Live, we offer a platform for people from all walks of life to share their experiences, their triumphs, and their challenges. It's a space where people thrive and connections are made through the power of storytelling. And today we have something truly special in store for you. So grab your favorite beverage, find a cozy spot, and let's dive into another episode of Reflect Live. Get ready to be inspired, moved, and maybe even crack a smile or two. This is Reflect Live with Michelle.
Good morning. You've reached Michelle, the host of Reflect Live podcast, and I have the pleasure to have Jason Tuttle with me today. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning.
It's pretty early this morning, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, normally I've dealt with sleeping issues for years, so normally I'm usually well up before this.
Yes, look, and have that on the side. That has to help. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. This is a sensitive subject, and I cannot relate to what you're going through, and so I really appreciate you sharing your story with us, and hopefully it encourages and helps somebody in your situation. So go ahead and introduce yourself and why you came on the podcast.
Okay, my name is Jason Tuttle. I'm a married father. I've been married 21 years as of this year. I have two kids, both teenage age children. My son was 15 at the time that he passed. My daughter is currently 15. Both of my kids have multiple mental and physical disabilities. Let's see, they're both basically wheelchair bound. They're both nonverbal. They're both epileptic. They deal with seizures. In fact, of the 6 different kinds of seizures, I've seen 4 of them in my house. Both have neurological delays. Even though they were both chronologically 15 years old, they both functioned about 4 to 6 years old. And then on top of that, my son was born with a rare condition called Eagle-Barrett syndrome. And
Can you tell me what that is? Because I don't know what that is.
Well, the most simplistic way to explain it, because they still don't officially know what. They know characteristics of it. They just don't know what causes it. They don't know what the beginning, they don't know what the start of it is. So basically, my son was born with one kidney. That one kidney, while in utero, did sustain damage, meaning it wasn't filtering or flowing right. So fluid was kind of backing up into it. I mean, fluid was getting through it, but not at the rate as like your kidney or my kidney was doing it. So it was it was coming back up into the kidney. So he had that. He was born without any abdominal muscles. He had no abdominal muscles. He had an abnormally large bladder that would need to be given a catheter about every 4 hours, at least initially. So I got to learn very early on how to cath my son. He could breathe normally, but because he didn't have the core stomach muscles, his lungs formed a little smaller. So whereas you and I can get that deep kind of breath and cough, he couldn't do it. He didn't have that in him. So with that being said, anytime cold and flu season came around, he was very susceptible to respiratory related illnesses. So for the first 5 years of his life, we were literally in and out of the hospital about every 6 months, because I knew that when cold and flu season came around, that if I didn't catch his issues early on enough with the machinery that I eventually got into my house, that I was taking him to the hospital, and we would inevitably be admitted to, eventually it was always one of the ICUs because of the machinery they had up in that area of the hospital. So we had all that. And then as of about the end of last year, it's looking like, genetically speaking, my son would have had a second rare condition and my daughter have the exact same rare condition, but that being her first rare condition. As of last year, it looks like we're case number 1, and not case number 1 for Emory Genetics, but case number 1, period. And yeah, the way Emory told us was, they said, when we do genetic testing, we have kind of an international database, and when we can't figure it out, we kind of share it to the world. And there was a team of scientists from England and I believe Denmark that were doing a study that they found something similar, but it wasn't exactly. So, for example, let's say they found gene ABCA. Well, they were studying gene ABCA. Well, my kids were similar, but instead of being gene ABCA, it was gene ABCB. And so there was a slight variation to that. And so, long story short, we know it's not a miracle answer. We've just always known that there was a piece of the puzzle that we didn't know that we needed to know. So from the time my son was born up until he passed, and still continued with my daughter, we've kind of had a wild special needs medical journey, a ride over the last 18 years.
Wow, that sounds like it. Was this something diagnosed at birth or found after that they were born?
This was actually after, as the story goes, right before we started doing like all the appointments and the week 20 appointment where you find out the sex of the child. Both of our families had kind of gotten into genealogy. And so like my father went back 10 generations in my family and there's no record of anything. And now I know if you go back far enough, they didn't necessarily record it because of stigmas with it. But even during the time where it was considered acceptable, there was nothing. And even on my wife's side, for 5 generations, there was nothing. And so we had 2 within 2 years of each other, and they had almost the exact same identical issues 2 years apart. So it was honestly, the way we found out was we got to the week of 20 appointment and we got in there. My wife and I were kind of playfully going back and forth because my wife wanted to know, I wanted to know the sex of the child because I'm a planner and I was the one that made the nursery, and she didn't want to know because, the traditional, well, this is the last secret we have in life and surprise. And And so the tech got to the point of the ultrasound where she was going to find out the sex of the child. She goes, well, do you want to know the sex of the child? And we kind of went back and forth. And before we could answer, she goes, well, I've found an issue and I need to know the sex. And so we said, okay, we want to know the sex. Well, you're going to have a boy. And we said, well, why do you need to know the sex? And she goes, because if it's what I think it could be, she said, it's rare in boys, but it's even rarer in girls. And so I need to know what the sex of the child is. And so we said, okay, can you tell us what it is? She was just like, no. She said, unfortunately, the doctor has to tell you. We later found out it was kind of a legal thing so that the doctor could tell us. And from that point forward, we started seeing a perinatologist. We started going kind of these specialist doctors. And we did that all the way up until my son was born.
Wow.
Is kind of how this whole ball started rolling. And then my daughter, when she was born, we thought she was the normal child, so to speak. And then we just happened to, there's an occupational therapist that came to our house that had an intern. And she asked us, she said, do you mind if my intern does, there's a skills assessment test called the Peabody Skills Assessment Test for kids that have delays and things of that nature. And it kind of gives you an idea of if they are delayed and kind of how far they're delayed at that point. So she did it. She came back and she said, well, it's in my opinion that your daughter's delayed as well. And at the time I didn't want to hear it. And so when I finally got to a doctor, it was the doctor that goes, I kind of agree with her. You may want to start taking your daughter to a neurologist. And that's when that ball started rolling. So within 2 years, we found out just all these just major medical issues with both of my kids.
When he was with your son, when he was in the womb and, they noticed something was not, not functioning correctly. Was there any doctors that you ran across that gave bad advice that just kind of like appalled you? And
well, at the time I didn't realize it, but at this point in the journey, I will tell people, especially new parents in the special needs world, I'll say you'll run across 2 types of doctors. I said, you'll run across a doctor that won't really tell you anything until he officially knows everything exactly, or you will run across a doctor that will tell you literally every variation of everything he can think of that may be possibly related to the issues because he's wanting to cover himself in today's litigious society. And just so that I couldn't come back and go, well, you never told me that. And so that's kind of what we had. when we started seeing the perinatologist for my son, we found out about his rare condition, or we didn't know it was a rare condition at that time, but we started seeing some of the characteristics of it. And he told us, how did he go? He goes, well, not only do you have, these are the issues like in his kidneys and the stomach area, we think he might have hydrocephalus. There are areas of missing white matter in his brain. And I mean, he may need a shunt to help alleviate some of the water pressure from the hydrocephalus. And I mean, he listed like 5 or 6 things to us that were just kind of big deals. And we're just like, it was almost that we got blindsided by it because it was just so much at once.
I have a friend that when they were doing the ultrasounds, they noticed that the baby was going to have Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor recommended to abort it because of the complications that it's going to have. Did you ever run across doctors like that?
No. And, my wife and I, before all of this ever started, when we found out she was pregnant with our son, she asked that comment. She goes, what if we have a child with, medical needs? And my response just almost immediately was, well, if we have a child with needs, we'll deal with the needs. And so both my wife and I are very anti-abortion. And so we were just like, we'll deal with whatever comes. I mean, this is what it is. If we're meant to be on this journey, we're meant to be on this journey. And so, boy, little did we know how ironic those statements were at the time when we said them.
I imagine in your marriage that it caused a lot of stress. I do a lot of podcasts of, like similar to your testimony, or, the child has some something wrong, right? And the high percentage of parents end up getting divorced because of the situation. Can you walk us through on how you guys survived and how you're coping right now?
The irony of, you asking me about our marriage is, we looked at the time about what the statistic was with just having one special needs child, and it was ridiculous. It was like 75 or 80%. And which, as everybody knows, regular marriage is at about 50% these days.
Right.
So, yeah, it was initially very difficult in the beginning. It was, as in my wife and I never, there were stresses there, but we never really had issues between us because we kind of took a united front kind of stance to it. Like we weren't going to let whatever these medical issues kind of divide and conquer us, no matter what it was. So did we have difficult times? Certainly. Were there a lot of very stressful times just because we didn't know what was going on? And with the combination of issues that we had when both of my kids were here, there was nobody that knew our exact situation within 1,000-mile radius of us. Yeah. So we had people that knew parts of it and they could kind of grasp what we were doing, but they never truly knew the totality of what we were dealing with at the time. So we essentially focused all of our energy and effort into the kids and to trying to figure out what was going on. And we dealt with it that way. But like I said, I will say as a disclaimer, it was still stressful. We still had our ups and downs. And like when I get people to say, well, you were so strong to be able to deal with this. And I will look at them and go, from the outside, yes, it looks that way. But from the inside, I tell people all the time, I said, I look strong, but I'm was probably one of the weaker people you could probably come across just because it was constant for years. So,
sure. Did you lose friends?
With the special needs stuff? No. I had a lot of people that didn't get it and didn't understand it, as one wouldn't be if you've never heard of something. But the reality is in the special needs world, because I'm a researcher. So when I found out about all these issues, I got on Facebook and online and I tried to find groups. And so I found people in my area that had special needs kids and were in part of those organizations. And so actually our circle grew rather rapidly at that point because we were running across all these people that had similar concerns. So it wasn't in the special needs world that we lost or, our paths uncrossed with anybody really.
Yeah. And what about his passing? Are people having a hard time recognizing or not knowing what to say?
Well, I'm at about, let's see, I'm getting on 2.5 years since he passed away. What I try to tell people is, when you have a loved one, especially a child pass away, initially you have what I would call all the fanfare. You have all the people sending in their condolences, and you have, the meals and all of the kind of that, emotional kind of celebration, if you will, towards you for about that first month. And then after that, it kind of it's like it really tapers off. And I never expected for it to go on forever, and I was very appreciative for those that did show their concern and for the times that they did. But you learn after time, those that have not dealt with death, especially the death of a child, it tapers off pretty rapidly. I mean, they just, I tell people, I said, some people somewhat get it, but a lot of the reason why people don't know how to handle, to be around, or maybe even to talk to someone that's lost a child, is it brings out something in them that they have to face that they may not want to face. And so they kind of run from it.
Makes sense.
Not my fault.
Type of thing.
Yeah, not my fault, not necessarily their fault, but at least from my end, when at least in the beginning, I needed people to be there. It was very frustrating because I'm just like, look, I'm not here to verbally vomit all over you or anything like that, but I do need someone. All I'm asking for is if I need a moment, I need you sitting there. I just want you sitting there. And so that was a hard thing to kind of adjust to.
Sure. If you can tell somebody that wants to be a supporter but doesn't know how, or maybe the right words to say to a griever, what would be your recommendation?
I'll come right out and say that there are no right words. I mean, I wouldn't tell people to stress over saying the right words per se. I mean, there are phrases and things that, in the grief community I'm a part of, that we all come across, that we all kind of cringe when we hear. And we know it's people trying to figure out something to say, trying to be helpful. And even though they're trying to be that way, sometimes it just comes out wrong. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. Can you mention, like, what are some of the, I guess, taglines or whatever you want to call them? I don't know what we're going to call them.
Let's see. I don't know how you do it. And I'll look at them and go, I didn't really have a choice. I'm a pretty faithful and religious person, but, at least in the beginning, when I would hear, well, heaven just needed another angel. It's not something I wanted to hear, a month, 3 months, 6 months after my son had passed away. There's another one I've heard. Grief is just love with no place to go. And I mean, that's very common. If you search online, you'll find that statement.
Wow.
And I mean, I get the sentiment behind it, but at least in the beginning, when it's raw and all that, that's the last thing I want to hear.
That's good. Good.
So those are kind of some of the things when people come up. But for someone that, a lot of times those of us that are grieving, we just want you. You don't necessarily have to say anything. We just want you there to be able to listen. If I'm there and I'm in a dark moment and I need you there, then you just may need to come to sit in the dark with me. It doesn't mean I'm going to do anything or say anything, but it's really that simple. It's not, it's like in talking with other men, at least in that niche of grief. I'll say to him, because I'm pretty blunt and straightforward, and I'll go, look, I'm not asking you to come cry on my shoulder with me. What I'm asking is just for you to be there. And so, and I look at him and go, if it makes you uncomfortable, imagine how uncomfortable the person that actually lost someone is feeling. Take your uncomfort and multiply it by about 100, and then you'll kind of get the grasp of what someone who's lost someone is dealing with.
Yeah.
So
I was watching your TikTok, and you were referencing to the women on there about men grieving, and they could just ask open-ended questions. Tell us a little bit about a man's perspective on grieving.
Well, as a little bit of a kind of a backstory to it, when I got introduced into grief with the loss of my son, I got on Facebook, tried to find Facebook groups just for people that I knew that maybe not exactly what I was dealing with, but were dealing with loss, especially children. And so typically when you get in those groups, it's typically 90 to 95% women. It's about 5% men. And of those 5% men, probably 0.5% are actually active in those groups. So how all of this started was the fact I was getting frustrated that I just wanted people that were similar to me to be able to kind of bounce things off of. And I wasn't finding it. And when I would post the things I would, because I was the token unicorn man in some of these groups posting, I was getting a lot of response. And so, but with that being said, even to this day, and I've been doing this, I'm now in about 7 months at this point of doing all of this. I get women all of the time that say, well, my husband's not opening up. What do I do? My boyfriend, my significant other, how can I get him to open up? And I said, I've got, in my opinion, I mean, been a man all my life, kind of understand how a man works. Here's 3 things that I think will greatly help with you being able to get him to open up. I said, first thing you need to do. And I said, I don't really like the phrasing, but it's the best way I can put it is you got to create a safe space. I said, because no man, if a man feels like whatever he said is going to be used in a weaponized form against him later on down the road, he is not going to open up. It is what it is. I said, it's the old stereotype that me and my wife could argue about something, and 10 years down the road, she could come back. Well, at April 3rd at 7:55 in the morning, you said that we may, a lot of time, we are very simple, but when we want to know something, we'll remember it. And I said, a man will remember that you got that specific just to throw it back at him. And so I said, when you're listening to us, you have to listen and not listen to reply. And I said, you may not think there is, but that's a huge difference. I said, yeah, you can respond after whatever he does and gets it out. I said, but if you're only listening to make a response at the moment you think you can, I'm going to notice that. They're going to notice that. And because we notice it, instead of you listening to what our issue is, we understand from that point that you're only listening for your gain. And so, look, as a man, I have no problem with, if my wife wants to open up to me, I welcome it. But in the times that I do, what I'm looking for is for you to listen with the same sincerity that I am to you, is what I'm looking for. So, create a safe space, listen, and then respond. And then the biggest thing that I've come across is, oh Lord, I lost my thought. The biggest thing that I've come across is when, if a man comes up, a lot of men are, I wouldn't say soft-spoken, but they only talk when they need to. And so if a man comes up to you and finds it important enough to reveal something to you, especially on the emotional spectrum, let him get it out. And then if after he gets it out, if you blow it off, look down at it, think it's not as significant, that your feelings are more important than his, I said, a lot of men will give you 1 or 2 chances at it. And if you continually do that, they will shut down. I said, that's just kind of how men work. And that works with men talking to women and men talking to other men, no matter the subject. And I said, you have to understand that a man is taught from birth that the woman's feelings come first, no matter. We're taught from birth till death. And the example I give everybody is, if you go into any house in this country, most of them will have that sign, happy wife, happy life.
Sure.
And I said, nothing wrong with it. 99% want their wives to be happy. And we want that. But what we're also taught is we're secondary to you. So if you want us to open up, you've got to kind of change that narrative a little bit to let them understand that what they're thinking is more important than that for that time being. That's typically what I try to tell the women that I come across. There's other things that I go into with them, but those are the big things.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I'm trying to create a safe space and a place initially for men to be able to feel okay and not ridiculed about their emotions as it relates to grief, is what I'm trying to do. With that being said, I have also opened it up to, spouses and siblings and parents and even though my initial start of this was men, I'm trying to help as many different variations of people in the grief community as possible with just my writing, my commentary, my TikToks, just all those different forms of social media.
Yeah, perfect. Do you have a grief relief group, like an online group or anything that you host?
I do not. There are several like grief Zoom sessions that I'm a part of right now that I go to, that I do, that from other people that I do promote, that I've we've all kind of helped each other in this community. And so I've had people ask me about it. And with all the different forms of social media and all that, I just don't want to spread myself too thin.
Definitely.
And since I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok.
What's your handle?
Well, on Facebook, it's letters to the word T-O, Zachary.
Okay.
Zachary. And then and then Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok is at letters to the number 2 Zachary.
Okay.
Is what that is for all the other ones, just because I couldn't get it the way it was on Facebook for any of the other ones.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. A couple more things. Can you provide us a great memory about Zachary?
Sure. My son, even though he was nonverbal and couldn't necessarily communicate per se, he was a ladies' man. He loved women very much so. He had a hierarchy of women. Honestly, it was blonde, brown, brunette, black, and redheads in that order.
That is so funny.
He had very clear crystal blue eyes, and that was the first thing that most women noticed about him. And he would play that to his advantage, so he could get you close enough to give you a hug. He thought I didn't know that, but I recognized that very early on. And in fact, there's one woman that he knows very well through one of our special needs organizations, that when you see the professional pictures they've done of him looking at her, you can see the love in his eyes with her. And I told her for years, I said, if you and your husband ever divorce, and I hope it never happens, I said, but he's the next in line. I know.
He's already called it. He's already spoken for it. That's great. Thank you for sharing, by the way. I really appreciate that. At the end of the broadcast, I always like my guests to leave with words of wisdom. What are your words of wisdom for our listeners?
2 things. Even though grief is a mountain similar to Mount Everest, especially when you first join on the journey. But even those people that climb Mount Everest, if you notice, they go a short distance and then they have a base camp. And then they go to a short distance and they have another base camp. And they continually do that till they get to the top of the mountain. And so that's kind of what the grief journey is. You'll never get away from climbing that mountain. However, you are allowed some breaks. And if you take it in chunks, it's much more digestible. It's much more doable over the long haul, is what grief is. So even though there's a possibility you may never get to the summit, but that doesn't mean you can't rest at times. And that doesn't mean you can't have happy times in between. I mean, the longer you get at it, the farther apart some of the tough memories get, but you'll still have them. You'll still have your adversities, but you can create space for some of the more positive stuff once you've done it long enough, is what I would tell people. And then as it relates for men in the grief community, the irony of men not opening up about emotions, I laugh at times, because the male gender is the type of gender that goes, well, I'm not going to have anybody tell me what I am and am not going to say. You can't tell me but yet you let everybody and their brother tell you how you're going to feel and what you're going to do about it as it relates to emotions related to grief, or emotions in general. So I tell people, or I tell men, I go, what does it matter what they think? They're not dealing with what you're dealing with. Online thing, I tell them, I look at them and go, do you know how many stupid comments there are on the internet? Why are you worried about any of them? I said, because there are going to be people out there that are going to disagree with you just to disagree with you. So I would just say, don't worry about what the naysayers say. Find someone that you feel comfortable with and slowly start opening up with them, is what I would tell them.
That's great. Well, Jason, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story and giving us insight that, hopefully that it helps people that's in your current situation or no friends or family. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, God bless you and have a great day.
Thank you for watching and listening to this episode on Reflect Live Podcast. Next up, Dion Woods, Saturday, May 11th. Dion Woods, an artist with the soul of a poet, a motivational coach, and speaker who redefines the very essence of inspiration. Dion shares not just her journey as a successful entrepreneur and artist, but as a mother navigating the poignant transitions of an empty nest. With grace and humor, she speaks to the very core of our human experience, the struggle of growth, the beauty of resilience, and the unyielding power of love.
Listen on Spotify, iHeart, iTunes, or live stream on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram.
Register now on www.reflectlivepodcast.com. Follow so you don't miss out on new live